Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Work at Home Rockstar Podcast. Excited for today's episode. We're talking to the owner and founder of Hopskip Media, and she helps people get more leads by educating people about digital advertising platforms. And she also works individually with people as well, if that's what they're interested in. Very excited to be rocking out today with Ameet Khabra. Ameet, you ready to rock?
I definitely am, Tim.
Perfect.
As much as I possibly can, I guess.
Good. Well, let's start off on a good note here. Tell me a story of success in your business that we can be inspired by.
Oh gosh, I feel like my entire career, to a certain degree, even though it's had its pitfalls, is probably um, a success in itself. Really, just being
Mhm.
able to get to this place of being able to say that I actually own a business. Because I think for a really long time, I wouldn't even say that. I'd just be like, "Oh yeah, I just do ads," and then I call it quits at that point. So even getting to a place where I'm like, I own an agency and we do this, this, and this. I think it's kind of a success story because I think that's a big thing that
Totally.
a lot of business owners struggle with is like calling themselves like a CEO or an entrepreneur or even just saying that I own a business um, can be rather difficult. Oddly enough, yeah, like I feel like a lot of people on the outside would be like, "That should be easy. That should be the easy part," and I'm like, "No, it's not."
No, well, yeah, you have sort of like this I don't know, imposter complex, I think, right? Like when you're talking about these things. I know I just got business cards made and I sometimes will say owner, founder, but I'm like, no, I'm just gonna put web person on it now this time instead.
Oh
It
gosh,
just is what it is, right?
yeah, we got new cards made in June, and I had the same struggle where I'm like owner, and then what do I put at the end of it? So eventually, I settled on managing director, but I'm like, what does that even mean? Like after a certain point, I'm like, they're just words, but like I had such a struggle trying to figure out what to write, and I'm like, at the end of the day, I still do the same job. It's just the title. It's just that for some reason we hold so much weight towards it for
Yeah.
whatever reason.
Well, and you know what? I mean, the way I thought about it was like, what kind of benefit does it give me to say that I'm the owner and founder of a company on a business card?
Hmm.
Like, what are they going to do with that, right? I thought, I thought if I'm giving out cards, why don't I just give out the card and keep in mind if they're looking for something, that's what they're going to call me for. So I'm going to put
Yeah.
that right on the business card, and don't worry about the owner founder thing. So maybe it's I don't know, maybe I'm trying to distance myself away from that, but also it has a practical sense too.
Yes, no, exactly. I was like, I feel like everybody needs to know that, but at the same time, I'm like, does everybody need to know that? Like,
Yeah. Yeah, I think it might be that's the thing. It's the kind of the opposite, right? I mean, a lot of entrepreneurs are sort of uncomfortable with that idea of like I'm running a business, even though they're sort of self-employed. And then there's other people that want to like flaunt that and go like, I'm the owner and founder of this company. And
mhm.
it's one of those things where I guess it just depends on what you think other people are going to want to call you for. They want to talk to the owner or do they want to talk to the person who's going to get the job done for them, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's actually a really good point. Yeah, oftentimes I'll have that with clients where they're like, we want to talk to you, and I'm like, I'm not going to do anything different. Like, you could talk to me, you could talk to Idris, you could talk to the analysts themselves. I'm like, it's not going to change. So I'm like, really, at this point, just take the person that you have. They're probably the best, well-versed person. But it's always just really funny because I'm like, okay, like there's like that whole mind shift note, or yeah, there's a mind shift even just in consumers wanting to talk to the person who owns everything.
Yeah.
And sometimes they're not necessarily the best person to talk to, so that's
Oh,
always
they
the thing in the back of my head where I'm like, is this really important?
yeah, yeah. Well, actually, the only time that it would be useful to talk to the owner founder is if it's a company of one,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
right. I mean, other than that, I mean, you're probably talking to a manager who's really just not necessarily doing that work. He's just going to hand it off to somebody anyways.
Hmm.
That's going to actually do the work for them, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So now along our journey, not everything is good notes. We hit some bad notes from time to time, things that don't go as planned. So I'm wondering, can you share with us something that didn't go as planned for you and how you recovered?
Where do I begin is really the question. um I think probably like my first um I want to call it a roadblock because I don't want to call it a failure because I don't really think it was really much of a failure. But it was like 6 years ago, 7 years ago, I had decided to leave agency life. So I was working for an agency at that point. Decided to leave agency and go full time freelancing. Took on my first client, like I think maybe 2 weeks into my full-time freelancing, and took whoever I could get really at that point. Cause that's the note, like that's the whole thing where all of us don't really look at who the client is. We just go, yay, somebody wants to hire me. And then we want to move really, really quickly and over deliver and do all these great things for them. And I think in that experience, I learned that you really need to vet who you're taking on as a client just as much as they need to vet who they're actually hiring for everything. So it took a total of 45 days for me to have to file a lawsuit against the client. Yeah, because he flat out
Okay.
just refused to pay. So I walked in as a Google Ads expert, which I mean, I'd like to believe that I am. And he had sat there and he was like, I need social media and I need content and I need a website and all this stuff. And I went, okay, yeah, we could do that. And I put a quote together and found a bunch of people who could help with all of that. Um, and then we went and executed the work, and I guess it wasn't to his standard, even though he really wouldn't like tell us what that was, which was like the most annoying part, because I just sat there and I'm like, okay, there's a mistake on the website. You keep on telling me there's a mistake on the website, but I can't see it because I've been staring at this thing for 20 some odd hours. So like obviously we need fresh eyes to tell us where the errors are so we can go in and fix them. And at one point he just flat out refused. And he was like, if you can't see them, then you're not good at your job. And I just kind of sat there and went, okay, okay, like I don't know what I'm supposed to do there, right? And then eventually he had this thing where, and I should have heard it during our initial meetings, because I heard it and then it just kind of went in through one ear and out the other, where he had basically said that um, he had a history of kind of bullying agencies into giving him what he wanted. So oftentimes that would end up being months of free work or credits or something like that. And I didn't really like, I heard him say it and I didn't really quite register any of it, and just went, oh, it'll be fine. It's okay. No big deal. This is a referral. He's like my friend's accountant. Shouldn't be too much of an issue. So his last email to me was, see you in court. Because I was like, you have to pay your invoice. You have a signed agreement with us. Like, what the heck? And instead of sitting there emailing back and forth for hours on end, I just simply picked up my phone and called someone. And I'm like, so he wants a lawsuit. So let's just give it to him. And I think he saw me as like this timid little girl who didn't really have like the nerve to do it. So which is why he kind of went in and was like, okay, let's just see, like, let me push your buttons. And um, the one thing a lot of people don't realize is that I was raised by my mother, and she's a little bit of a spitfire. So naturally, I was going to end up being like her, and then get the brutal honesty from my dad. So really, at this point, I was just like, okay, let's go. I'm like, you want to play this game? Let's play this game. Eventually, I did end up winning the case, but I didn't get the full amount back, which I kind of I made that decision myself, because I was just at that point where I was like, I don't really want to actually go to court and waste a whole day fighting with this person for no reason. And if that means that it's a $500 loss, it's a $500 loss. It's much greater. My mental health is so much greater than that 500. But one of the other biggest things I learned in between all of that was you really need to be doing what you're actually passionate about, and web design and content and social media. Um, Although I do those all for the agency internally, I don't really care for. Even after all of these years, I love being on social and it's fun, but it's not necessarily something that brings me joy. Whereas Google Ads and sitting there and looking at all of these little details that seem to be incredibly complicated to everybody else around me make me happy for whatever reason. So for me, after him, it was more of that notion of going, okay, I'm going to do one thing and I'm going to do it really, 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 really well, versus doing multiple things and be mediocre at them.
Yeah, man, there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah, it's quite the story.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a couple like red flags too. I've definitely noticed that someone who wants to hire you for a whole bunch of different things, it's probably not going to work out.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I think that you know what, if he has a habit of doing that, that's probably his plan. Like, it's like, okay,
Yeah.
well, I know you're really good at this, but I'm going to ask you to do all these other things because I know you're not going to be very good at it, and then I'm going to get it for free, right?
Yeah.
Because that's the thing, is that we can't be good at everything. Like, I suppose we could, but you at some point, if you're going to run a business, you have to sort of figure out what it is that you do really well, because it's very difficult to promote I do everything, but it's
Yeah.
easier to promote I do this specific thing. Um, and then it's exciting to hear that you say, like, because I do websites and design and stuff, and that's what I like to do. But when it comes to the nitty-gritty details of the ads, I like to have someone else do that. So it's
Exactly.
it's cool. There's
I believe in giving the work to somebody who will actually sit there and be like, oh, like have that spark in their eye and be like, yes, this is exactly my thing and this is what I want to do. And I understand obviously that you're not in love with your job 24/7 all the time, but like if it's, I don't know, let's say an 80-20 split, I think that's a pretty good sign at that
yeah.
point that that's what you're meant to be doing. So for me, as odd as it may sound, I think I was meant for ads. I think this was exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. Um, Web design, not so much.
Well, and you know what? That is a bad note, but it's not as bad as it could be because you did have an agreement. And you know what? There's a lot of people that don't have agreements. So I
That's
think
true.
that's one of the things that you definitely did right, because if you didn't have that agreement, I don't know how that lawsuit would have went. Probably
Oh
wouldn't
no,
have gone well.
I would have been in the hole for all of that money really at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, over and over again, we always hear anytime that something like that happens, there's always a red flag before, or like some sort of like gut feeling that, uh-oh, I don't know if this is going to go the way. And then we end up taking that work on just because probably we need it, right?
It's desperation really, or at least for me, it was desperation. I wanted to prove that leaving the agency was a good idea and that it was what was meant for me at that point. So for me to be able to sign a client within like I think it was like the first 2 weeks of doing it, I was like, yeah, this is it. Like
Yeah.
this is me proving that this is for me. Um, and I think that was really it was a cool moment. But then having everything unfold and I kind of just did it quietly so nobody else really understood, like knew what was going on was the other half of it where I'm like, I kind of feel like I should have talked about it a bit more and had like that support with my friends, especially like other business owners or freelancers at that point. Because I'm like, I think that would have helped quite a bit. And I think it really, and it would have helped me, but I think it really would have helped them as well. Because after a certain point, when I started talking about it years later, a lot of my friends were like, "Oh, I had this happen to me, and I had this happen to me, and I'm having this happen to me, and I don't know what to do." And I'm like, "Here are some really weird tips and tricks on how to figure this out."
Yeah.
Because a lot of people would go the lawyer route really for these lawsuits, and I actually went civil claims because it's significantly cheaper when it comes to fees. And I think the cap is it's either 25 or 50,000. I can't quite remember off the top of my head.
That's
Um,
a big cap.
yeah, it's pretty decent. I think it's 50. I'm quite certain it's 50. So if somebody owes you up to 50,000, that's small claims. So you could save a significant amount of money if you go with a civil claims agent versus a lawyer. Um, and that was something that not a lot of my friends knew, or actually any of my friends knew, because they were just like, that's not information anybody ever gives you.
Uh-huh.
And I just got lucky that I happened to be in the right place at the right time to meet this person. And then he was the first person I thought of when I was trying to figure it out. And he's like, yeah, this works perfectly for something what we're doing.
Wow.
Um, and that's like basically literally how I even got to civil claims in the first place. Because chances are I would have called a lawyer and spent thousands of dollars on that just to
Oh yeah.
regain what I think it was 5-6 thousand. So I'm like, that wouldn't have made sense. Whereas I think I might have paid Wayne 500 for the
Wow.
entire thing.
Wow.
Um, so yeah, significant savings when you actually know what route to take properly.
That's awesome. I didn't know that either, so thank you.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yes, of
that's
course.
really, really good tip. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about getting fans for your business, because that's what you do. So tell
Yes.
me what is it that you did first of all? How did you start doing it? And then, how would you do it now if you were to do it differently?
I don't know if I would do anything differently actually this time around. I feel like me stumbling into how I got here is probably the perfect way to do it. I mean, I think I would try to be a bit more calculated and more strategic with everything. But everything I did initially was completely unintentional. I just was alone in a city where I didn't know anybody either. So I had left British Columbia, moved to Alberta, and I didn't really know a lot of people and just, anybody that I knew from work, but that was kind of the end of it. So then eventually I just started going up to meetups because there wasn't anything for paid, obviously, because there's like 3 people who do paid at this point. Um, so I used to go to the social media one, UI, UX, web dev, SEO, content, and just show up. And people would look at me really funny and be like, okay, well, what are you doing here? You're not even in this field. And I just sit there and hang out, like literally just have random conversations with these people, ask them about their jobs, learn more about what they were doing. Eventually they got me to come in and actually do presentations with them, in relation to like SEO and ads, or like content and ads and stuff like that, and found ways to find it like for them to be parallel. Because I think a lot of people after a certain point were like, oh yeah, like this all makes sense, like we're all still connected. And then eventually it became like a big joke where if I didn't show up, everybody would be calling me and be like, where did she go? And at one point I used to have like, or I still do have them, I have stickers of my face. I just thought it would be a funny thing to do. And I took them to conferences and handed them out to everybody. And a couple of my friends put them on popsicle sticks. So every time I wouldn't show up, they'd have me there at the very least, which I thought was really cute and sweet. And also absolutely hysterical because people would sit there and be like, all the new people would be like, what are you guys doing? Like, who is this person? Why is her face on this sticker and this popsicle stick? But that was kind of really how I fleshed out like my network initially. And then when everybody ended up leaving their agency jobs or their 9 to 5s, they went off to start agencies themselves. And that's kind of how like the ball kind of started rolling in terms of actually getting clients. And even when the ones that had left agency went to a bigger 9 to 5, and then they needed help or new vendors for their ads. So then they would call me and be like, okay, well, we know you're freelancing. Why don't you do this for us? Like we've worked together before, we know each other and stuff like that. And then eventually I started just taking everything online as well. So I started blogging quite a bit. So people who didn't know me personally started associating Google Ads in Edmonton with Ameet. And that was kind of just like the end all be all really at that point, where all I had to do was just continue blogging and acting, or what felt like acting in my head at that point as the expert. And it was just like this little snowball effect that kind of just kept on happening. And yeah, then Instagram happened and I started doing a little bit more posting on that, and that's grown quite a bit. Yeah, that's basically how we've kind of gotten to this point. It's like this weird random stumbling into really great tactics that I didn't even realize existed until I did them and figured it out 2 years later.
Wow. The stickers on the face is hilarious. That is actually really, really good. Oh man, I wish I thought of doing that.
It's your idea now. You are more than welcome to take it.
Yeah. Oh wow. No, that's a really, really good idea. And I mean, it sounds to me like you just use a lot of personality in what you do, right? And
I
meet as many
tried
people as
to.
possible.
I think for me, I think, and this is something that this came maybe a year ago. I was talking to this person maybe a year prior to this message. And she also did the same thing, paid search, and had a whole studio again around it. And we would talk about just the issues that she was having. And I would also tell her about like mine. And it was just like this organic conversation with somebody on the internet that I had no idea what she looked like. And then I remember one day I just like randomly thought of her and realized that I hadn't heard from her in like 6 months or something like that. So I reached out because I was just like, where did you go? I would talk to you every day and now you've disappeared. And it turned out that she actually ended up changing careers. So she would sit there and look at me in stories or my posts or just in our conversations together and realize how passionate that I was around ads, that I actually really genuinely enjoyed them. And then she sat there and looked at herself and went, I don't care as much. So then she spent the next 6, 7, whatever months looking at every other digital facet, and then went, I like content. I really love content. That's what I want to do. So she came back and she was like, I want to thank you for that, because she's like, I wouldn't have done it if it wasn't for you. So I think for me, I think the biggest asset that I have is literally the fact that I actually really do enjoy what I like do, like what I do for a living. And I think that comes through pretty easily, or I'm at least hoping that it does. That I think it makes it a little bit easier for people to make that decision in terms of wanting to work with us or not, or even wanting to follow along on Instagram or any other platform, because they're like, at least she actually enjoys it. It's not her trying to push product or services onto people for the sake of doing it. It's like something that she actually genuinely enjoys.
That's awesome.
Hey Rockstar, I hope you're enjoying this episode of the Work at Home Rockstar podcast. If you didn't know already, my business is Creative Crew Agency. We build websites. Now, let's talk about your website for a minute. Most people realize that at this day and age, we need a website, but we don't really know what the website is supposed to do. And sometimes you'll just go and build a website for the sake of building a website. What I do is I make sure that your website actually accomplishes a goal. Now, there are three main goals to most websites. Number one is to provide information and build credibility. Number two is to schedule some sort of appointment and get them onto a sales call. Number three is to sell something like an e-commerce site. Now, when you're setting your website, you have to be very mindful that the visitor doesn't know what to do. And so you have to provide them with a roadmap that leads them down a path to wherever you want them to go. On my website, I want them to be on a free consultation. So that's why when you go to creativecrewagency.com, you'll see information about scheduling a free consultation. Now, for you though, I'm going to provide you with an extra link so that you can get your free website audit. Go to creativecrewagency.com/free website audit and schedule an audit with me, and I'll go through your website live and determine what we can do to improve your conversions and make sure that you're getting the business from your website. Go to creativecrewagency.com and we'll see you there.
That's really good advice. I mean, and that's the thing, right? Especially in this world where we have so much choice. I mean, why not find somebody who really loves what they're doing, right? And you can see that through all the social media platforms that we have now. You can see them on podcasts. You can see them on YouTube. You can see them on Instagram. And if they are smiling and have fun with it, well, then chances are you're going to think this is a good person to work with, right? So that's really good advice.
Yeah, thank you.
So now, what about the band? So how do you approach, or do you actually delegate things? Like, how do you approach building teams?
Initially, it was kind of haphazardly. I'm not gonna lie. I kind of just went, I don't want to do this anymore, so you do it, and I don't want to do this anymore, so you do it. And I didn't really implement any SOPs or anything. I just kind of went, you're the expert, you figure it out. Really type of nonsense, I guess. And I think the biggest thing, because I've blown up and rebuilt the agency more times than I can count, and I'm actually currently doing that right now. And the SOPs is like the biggest thing that's been my focus lately, where I'm like, I can't keep on running an agency and not knowing what people are up to. Like it's just not feasible really at this point. Like
No.
I can't sit there and be like, I'm an agency owner and I don't know what half my staff is up to half the time, right? So for me, it was initially just kind of going at it in terms of jobs that I didn't necessarily want to do. And now it's more impact than anything else. Is there somewhere where I'm lacking that someone else can do a better job? So for a while, project management was that. And now I'm realizing that project management isn't all that horrible anymore. That I can easily take on that job and do it. And I have been for the last maybe about 2 months now. And it's been pretty good. I actually don't mind it as much as I thought I was going to. And then sometimes it's like, oh, maybe I shouldn't be the one running Google Ads. And for a really long time, I ran away from it. And now I'm sitting there taking accounts from a couple contractors that we let go, and I'm flipping them pretty quickly. And I'm just sitting there laughing at myself going, you dummy, like you're actually really good at your job. Like, why are you running away from something that you're good at? So for me, it's more or less just like looking at what we have going on and trying to fill the gaps in there. So I know that running ads is something that I'm good at. So I'm going to continue doing that until the workload is a bit too much. And maybe if I want to start working a little bit less, then maybe hiring somebody in that position makes more sense. I know that I hate meetings. It's literally I don't want to talk about the numbers that I've been looking at all month. Like it's just not for me because I've already talked to myself about it like 50 million times. And I have to explain that to a client is just like one of those things where I just can't do it. So we have a director of sales and marketing, and I kind of tack that onto his job where I'm like, you meet with clients now. And he loves it. He loves talking to people, and that's something that he really, really enjoys. So it works really well that he takes something that I don't necessarily enjoy and he does. And that way I'm able to focus on the things that I believe that I'm really, really good at. So building the team now is more or less of where can we put, or where can we have more impact and make honestly my life a little bit easier, but also give our clients exactly what they're expecting.
Right on. I've also found that creating like operating procedures is useful even to keep ourselves accountable and to
Mm-hmm.
make sure that we're doing the right things as well. Because, you know, when you're self-employed working on your own, sometimes your time can run away from you. Like next thing you know, your day is gone. What did you do with it?
Yeah,
Right?
I actually was supposed to be at a webinar and showed up 15 minutes late because I just started doing random stuff. And it was like for a friend too. And I had to text her afterwards and be like, I am so sorry. Like,
Yeah.
I'm deeply, deeply sorry. But I'm like, this is just like, and really for her, obviously she understood, but I'm like, this is just how it is. Like, we just get into something and suddenly it's half an hour in and we were only supposed to do it for 5 minutes. Like,
Yeah, and like our energy can be different during like random days. Like, I mean, when you're really excited, maybe you're not, maybe you're having a hard time focusing, or maybe you're on a real great roll,
mhm.
and sometimes you're not feeling it. And but there's certain things need to be done all the time, no matter what you feel like. And so having some those operating procedures in place allows you to keep yourself accountable. And then, like you say, when you're ready and you got too much work, it's already all packaged up to hand to somebody else, right?
Yeah, and there's no questions really at that point. You just sit there and say, here is how we do it. Even like onboarding new clients, contract needs to go out before we can even get the questionnaire. Before we get the questionnaire, we have to get access to an account or something along those lines. And then even how we set up accounts is starting to change because I was like, the naming, letting everybody else decide on naming conventions is probably the dumbest thing I've ever done. Because now I go in and I'm like, none of this makes any sense.
Yeah.
And I have to go in and separate everything and make it make sense for me, but also the reporting side of things, right? Like a client seeing an ad group named ad group is not descriptive. Like, but a client seeing an ad group named orthodontist or Invisalign or something along those dentistry type of words, that's going to make sense to them because they're like, okay, this one is talking about this one's talking about this one's talking about braces. And that makes sense for them. And it also helps with us writing better ad copy and all of these other things. So it's one of those things where I am unfortunately relearning right now. But at the very least, I've seen it now. I'm like, okay, let's go back and actually make sure that we actually have all these steps in place, so that way we're not in this position again.
Love it. So now what about tools? I mean, we live in a digital world, lots of tools around to use. Which ones are useful for you?
The top two right now for us is Asana as our project management tool. So we're able to break up everything in like workspaces. So I have an internal one where it's just people who are working on internal marketing or content or whatever else. They're housed there. And then we have one that's strictly just for clients. And that's where we place a couple templates as well. So that way, every time we bring on a new client, it's just a duplication and we put in their name and we're off to the races. And then we're able to obviously assign it to the person who's actually supposed to be working on it, deadline, and then they're able to see what client that they're working on versus just kind of be like, oh, we need to do this for XYZ person. It doesn't really work very, very well, which is something that I used to do. So it's not, I feel like some people are going to be like, yeah, that's a no-brainer, but really it wasn't for me at that point. So yeah, using a project management tool is a big one, especially with our team being completely remote and basically all over the planet. We don't know what times
Yep.
anybody's going to get to, so
Yep.
having a due date for everything has been the biggest game changer for us. And then Slack for communication has been the greatest because now we're able to respond to each other at whatever hours we're working or are online, and it's kind of perfect because a lot of our staff is a couple hours ahead of us. So they'll actually ask and answer questions before we even wake up. And then we're kind of off to the races on that front. So we're able to kind of have that little, that cycle and communication where it actually works really, really well. But then also we have a couple hours that overlap. So that way we're able to just have the discussions. I'm not a big fan of meetings, which I've definitely mentioned. So I don't really do like internal meetings unless I have to. I want to avoid it. I don't want to waste somebody's time for the sake of just having team meetings really at this point. So then we'll use Google Hangouts for those meetings just because all of our stuff is Gmail. I mean, we run Google ads, so naturally we're going to go the Google route for all of our products as well. And that's been relatively pretty good. I don't think we've really had any issues with Google Hangouts as well.
Nice, right on. Yeah, I think using a project management and even Slack for communication, it's so much better than email too. Don't you
Hmm.
find? Like, oh,
Yeah, email kind of, I feel like email is like how we compare mail to email is almost how we compare email to Slack now.
agree. Yeah, and I find that like a lot of people will try to like communicate over like maybe Facebook Messenger or something like that, and I find that that just gets mixed up in all the personal stuff. Whereas with Slack, you can set your work hours. You know, you've got sort of like a separate thing, and it also is an app on your phone, so you know
Hmm.
you can use it as you know. Some people are like, well, I like to be able to text and all that, but you're gonna get lost if you start to mix personal and business. I think, right?
Yeah, and I'd rather have a channel for every single client and have everything like in one area. So that's almost well, like the running history of what's been going on. So if at any point I go, hey, I need to take 2 days off, I'm really, really sick, I can't function or
Yeah.
something like that. Nobody has to sit there and be like, okay, well, did this XYZ get approved? Did this not get approved? It's like quick, let's go through the search history and just try to figure that out. And that's been actually pretty successful for us. So even when we had a project manager and there'd be a couple of times where she'd have to take a couple of days off, it was pretty easy for me to pick up what she was doing just based off of what was written in Slack. I just read through the notes and went, okay, this makes sense. This doesn't. And then, if it didn't make sense, then I just went back to her and went, can you please just answer these questions before I leave you alone for whatever X amount of days? Um, yeah, made life easy, made life significantly easier.
Yeah, and then another thing I use too a lot is Loom, like the screenshot videos.
Mm-hmm.
Those things are
Mm-hmm.
fantastic because for something that you they cut down the need for meeting, really, is what it comes down to. Because I'm the same as you. I mean, sitting there in a meeting, like half of it is like formalities and like, you know,
Yeah.
just wasting time, really. I mean, hey, it's not wasting time, team building, but like a team building thing is for that purpose. But when it's like coming to work, if you have to spend 10 minutes just kind of, hey, how's it going? Okay, let's get to work. Whereas if you do a screen share video, it's like, this is what I need. Send.
Yeah.
Off it goes, right?
But it also helps with like, especially on our end, client reporting. So there's a couple clients who need a little extra hand holding sometimes. So what I'll just do is a monthly video. And I'm like, here, now you don't have to call me. Like, this is perfect. That in the 10 minutes that it took me to do this video, I avoided an hour-long call.
Yeah.
So I've saved myself 50 minutes. And I've also saved them 50 minutes, which we could be doing working on
Their business.
our business or in our business or however you want to really allocate that time, maybe even sleeping if you want. Like, the time is yours. And I think that there's so much power in that where I think a lot of people are like, no, we need to be in meetings. And I totally understand it. Um, but at the same time, if I could get 50 minutes back and be able to maybe sleep a little bit more or just hang out and chill, I would much rather take that.
I agree 100%. So, time for your solo.
Mm.
Tell me what's exciting in your business.
Oh gosh, Google Ads, as much as everybody else says it's not, I think it is. Love it. Um, yeah, so I run an online marketing agency. We specialize in pay-per-click advertising. So that's Google, Facebook, Instagram. We've done a little bit of TikTok as well, as that's the emerging platform that's coming out as well. Um, but my core competency has been in Google Ads. I've been doing that for about 13 years now, running the agency for 5. Initially, it was just Google Ads, and eventually clients were like, we want you to do Facebook and Instagram. And then it just kind of, snowballed into its own little thing, which is a theme in my life is just things snowballing into something better.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that's kind of the spiel. I think that's like the really quick spiel. We work with like small to medium-sized businesses, and yeah, it's a lot of fun. We try to work as closely as we possibly can with everybody, just because it's kind of interesting that way. You get to actually see the real effects of your efforts for that business. Um, so yeah, we really encourage people who are at least working with us to actually really know their numbers and share them. What are your margins? How much are you paying per cost for that product that you're selling? So that way we can actually really make that difference. And there's been a couple of times where we've realized that clients aren't charging enough for what they're actually providing. And that's been an interesting kind of conversation to sit there and be like, we kind of have to fire you. And not for the reason that you think. It's you don't charge enough. and you're not
Wow.
making money, even though it seems like you are. And
Yeah.
oftentimes that's like a really shocking moment for them because they're just like, what? And I'm like, yeah, you need to raise your rate. So until then, we're going to terminate the contract.
Wow.
And it's been really funny just having this couple of times happen because I'm like, because I think a lot of people when they go into business, especially when they're not, especially product really at this point when they're not well versed in it, they just attach a price to something and then go, yeah, this makes sense, but they don't really account for like the overhead cost of everything else. So really at this point, like if it's a $30 product, it might cost you $10 to make. In their minds, they're making the $20 when in reality they're not, right?
No, they're
There's
not.
software, there's even just your home office is costing you money, there's lunches, there's gas and you going and picking up product. There's your own time to be accounting for as well, which is something that I'm notoriously bad at. Because for me, it's like, oh, whatever, my time doesn't count. And my director yells at me a lot because he's like, no, it costs money. It costs us money. And I'm like, I understand, but it also kind of doesn't, right? Like,
You're having fun.
yeah, exactly. I'm like, it's okay. It's fine. Um, but yeah, I think a lot of people don't really consider that part. So then when we start talking about margins and stuff like that, it's almost like they're a deer in headlights because they're just like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, well, how much is your time worth? Is it $10 an hour? Is it $20 an hour? Is it 100? Like that makes a difference in our margins.
Wow.
So it's always an interesting conversation, but those are the kind of numbers that we really do want to know if you're willing to tell us at the very least. Because that's what's really going to make your advertising efforts that much better and that much more like, oh, what's the word I'm looking for? I guess it's just better. Honestly, I can't think of another word for it.
Efficient, maybe.
Oh, there we go.
So okay, so then who would be like the ideal client for you, or who would get the most out of working with you right now? Like, what would their numbers be, I guess?
Ooh, oh, um, that's kind of a little bit of a harder question to answer. I think it really kind of comes case by case, really, at this point, because like lead generation to e-commerce is completely different. So with e-commerce, having healthy margins, which usually I would like to say is 40% or higher, is usually kind of the where you want to go. Especially when you're at, like if you want to start doing ads, just because it is a significant cost. Unlike web dev and social media and content creation, you're paying two fees essentially. Or if you're working with an agency, I should say, because you're paying agency their management fees, and then you're also paying directly to the ad platform for the ad spend that you're putting into the to promote basically. And I think that's another reason why it's so much harder to sell PPC sometimes because a lot of people are like, no, there's two costs, not one. Where social media, it's like you pay a social media agency and that's the end of it. Web dev, you just
Yeah.
pay the web dev and that's the end of it.
Yep.
So there's a little bit more consideration that needs to be put in place on that one. So when you're, especially for ecom, when you're thinking about it, adding both of those fees and being like, okay, what is my return on my investment after that point, or how does it add, or how much does it add to my or remove from my margin, I should say. With lead generation, knowing what the average order value is or how much you typically are charging people on average is a really great number to always have on hand. But also knowing how many leads you need to close one person is a really good one. Do you need 10 leads before you close one? Because that's information that I can go back and take and be like, okay, so if we got 100 leads for you in that month, let's say 10 of them closed and you're spending, let's say $2,500 or something like that a month on your advertising. Um, Now we know that we've made you about or hold on, actually the math. And then if you're charging $1,000, then you've made 10K. So now we know that you've made 7,500 off of our ads, and then we can calculate the ROAS off of that, or the return on ad spend, I should say. I have a tendency to use lingo sometimes. So that way we can kind of go back and be like, this is what we're projecting our growth to be, or what we're expecting everything to be. But having everyone just kind of very open and honest about what their numbers actually really look like. Because really at this point, like there's not really any judgment on our end. It's your business. We're not like, who are we to sit there and say that you have a good business or not? Literally the only area we're going to sit there and be like, you're doing it wrong is if you're not charging enough. And that's
Yeah.
only because it actually directly affects you.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it really doesn't make a difference to us. It's your business. We just want to care for it just as much as you do. And the only way to do that is to know those numbers.
So for the most part, do people like work with you long term, or do they sort of like get some sort of platform set up and then they take it over? Like what normally, how does it normally work?
Typically, they actually work with us on long term. So a lot of our clients have been with us for years. Actually, most of our clients have been with us for years, and that's simply because they don't want to learn the platform, especially Google Ads. It's pretty complicated. It can get pretty complicated. There's quite a few variables, um, and a lot of business owners have tried and have somewhat failed, I guess, or have learned from their mistakes and realized that working with somebody who actually knows what they're doing has been like the biggest learning for them.
Yeah.
So yeah, a lot of times I think there's a couple cases where obviously like clients leave, and that's just naturally how agency life is. And sometimes ad campaigns don't work, right? Like sometimes there's something out there, maybe it's your website that's just not that great that we can't make changes to because you don't have access to a web developer. Sometimes competition is too high and you're unfortunately your budget's too small. Um, there's a there's a number of things that could cause for a campaign not to work. So then obviously those guys wouldn't stay as long. But for the most part of our clientele, they've been with us, yeah, I think 3-4 years averaging. And most of them are still with us actually right now.
Yeah, and I mean the other thing with all that stuff is it changes quite often too. So if you were to sort of get things set up with an agency and up and running, then all of a sudden all the rules change. Like whereas if you hire someone like you to keep going, well then you're going to know when the rules change and you'll be able to adapt to that, right? Instead of having to, relearn it all as an owner, right?
Exactly. And especially with like new features and new platforms and stuff like that. So Google Analytics Universal is turning into Google Analytics 4,
Yep.
which is complicated in its own self. And
Totally.
even marketers like myself are refusing to learn it because we're just like, please stop. Like we don't want this.
Yep.
Or even like the introduction of new not ad platforms, ad formats within Google Ads and figuring out how to actually make them work versus not spend a ton of money and lose it all has been an interesting challenge. And then especially with the privacy laws changing and stuff like that, there's a lot going on. And I just, if you have the means to hire an agency, I would highly encourage it just because like you already have your own business to deal with. And there's, you're basically the admin person, tax, legal. Like, really, do you want to be marketing on top of that?
Nope.
Yeah, that's usually my answer for everything. Anytime somebody's like, do you want to do this? I'm like, I'd rather have someone else do it.
Yeah. So how do we find out more?
Two places. Our website is hopskipmedia.com. And then Instagram, I would say, is our best education platform. So if you really want to learn more about Google Ads and how to improve performance and all that great stuff, I am AdWords Girl on the platform. And actually, I'm AdWords Girl literally everywhere else on the internet too. I just don't have a ton of content on any other platform other than Instagram right now, just because for some reason I chose Instagram and really enjoy it. So that's where we're staying for the foreseeable future.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for rocking out with me today, AdWords Girl.
Thank you so much, Tim.
And to the listeners, make sure you subscribe, rate, and comment, and we'll see you next time on the Work at Home Rockstar podcast.